This is the Kestrel Country Podcast, where we discuss the people, places, and events all around Kestrel Country. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Kestrel Country Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Church. And this week we have a great conversation with Marty Shaw, a pilot who flew F-18s off of aircraft carriers, did instructing, flew for a long time for Alaska Airlines, and lives here in Kestrel Country. So we talk with him about all things flying, getting into flying, living in a place like this, and being a pilot and how all that works. So hope you enjoy this conversation with Marty Shaw.
The headsets, the 737 was designed with a cockpit that had, it was pre-aerodynamic. It was built in the 60s. So they put the windscreen in like you would put a truck windscreen in that came up on a hood before aerodynamics said that this should look like an eggshell, right? And so because of that, there's an exceptional amount of turbulence that happens that creates the noise. And that and the internal noise is deafening in a 737. Newer
in the cockpit. So when you're flying along, it's deafening.
Yeah. The flight deck, as they call it.
Sorry, flight deck.
Yeah.
So we don't
That's a
experience
word
it. We don't experience it in the cabin.
No, correct. That's correct. And because of that, you buy $1,200 headsets that have noise canceling and they're balanced. You can tweak them however you want. They're Bluetooth. Not that you would ever use that, but they're pretty exceptional.
Huh.
So anyway, but I've worn too many headsets for too long.
Well, thanks for bearing with us for a few minutes here.
Yeah, it was far more comfortable to wear a helmet in the Navy because the helmet was completely integrated and it had an ear cup on the inside. And when you were flying fighters, you could hardly hear any of the noise at all, which is amazing because it's probably the noisiest. The airplane I flew at the time was the noisiest externally, decibel-wise, that there was in the inventory. Hideously noisy. But stealth doesn't require a noise footprint that somebody can't see or hear. So on the flight deck, you would, push the gas on and you'd go a lot faster, but there was no significant noise increase because of the aerodynamics and where the engines were. And the integration of the system that was just, taking out all the background noise.
Top of the line at the time.
Yeah. I think it's the same. It's not much different.
Well, we should introduce you.
Oh, okay.
Marty Shaw. Yeah, tell us. So first of all, we're here to talk about flying.
Okay.
Because until very recently,
yeah,
that's what you've done. Which, were you about to say it's hilarious?
No, I said that's just the ancillary thought was that, yes, I did used to fly till recently.
Yeah. And you're here on the Palouse.
Yes.
And so you're a person, a local guy on the Palouse, which is why you're here talking to us. Yeah. But you had an interesting career and one that at least how many years? When did you move to Moscow?
05. So 18 years ago.
18 years. So for 18 years, 17 and a half, you flew while living in Moscow.
Correct.
Yeah. Which is, I don't know, at least to me, somewhat surprising, right? We have a little airport here, but not much.
Right.
So I guess to back it way up though, where did you grow up and how did you get into flying?
Well, I was born in the same state you were in Michigan.
Yeah.
I was born in Flint, Michigan. And actually so was Jana, my wife, even though she grew up in the Panama Canal Zone because her dad was a civil servant. But I grew up in Michigan. I think I was 1 when my dad went to medical school and he was 29 and had 4 kids.
Wow.
Then when he graduated from medical school and he was looking for a place to do internship and residency, he looked at an Ansel Adams book and saw the Cascades. And he's a big, what we call flatlander hunter, which is all flatland in Michigan, right? And so he was looking at these mountains, the Cascades, and he thought, there's got to be elk there, And he also had a friend who was from Caldwell, Idaho,
Oh, wow.
who was also an older guy. He was a year younger than my dad. So they were respectively 28 and 29 when they went to med school with kids. And so they kind of stuck together. And he invited my dad to come out and hunt in Idaho. And then they both selected the Puget Sound area in Washington State. So I grew up there in Issaquah. I went away for the Navy for a while. And when it was time to get out of the Navy, I went to Alaska Airlines because it was in Seattle.
Right.
So we lived there for a long time.
So how did you went into the Navy to fly for the Navy? Was that the main reason? Had you always wanted to fly?
No. My introduction to aviation was through a whole different set of circumstances. When I was in college, which I wasn't going to go to college, except for my grandmother said, if you go to a Christian college, she would pay for my tuition. Not room and board, but she would pay for the tuition. And at the time, I knew of this little school in Seattle, Seattle Pacific University, that had a great soccer team. And they would go to the Nationals every year, and they were very competitive. And I thought, well, if I went to school, then I could play soccer. I could keep playing. So that's why I went to school. And then when they recruited some kid to come in and take my spot, I quit school because that's the only reason I was there. And then I was kind of rudderless. And I read a book called What Color's Your Parachute? You ever heard of it?
No, I haven't.
By Richard Bowles, Bolles.
Okay.
And it's kind of a self-help book. It's like, who am I? What am I like? And what are other people like me? What do they do? And after doing this whole self-discovery thing, I decided that it came to the same conclusion that I always knew was if it had wheels and an engine, I was very interested in it, in the operational part of it, not building it. And at the very end of the book, it said, you need structure. You should be a police officer, military officer, that kind of thing, which is true, because I didn't have a lot of real structured influence growing up. And it also said that you are an operator. And so it was like, you can operate heavy equipment, run a big rig, logging truck, excavator, which I was also very interested in, earth mover, airplanes. And I thought, airplanes or excavator? And you can make more money flying airplanes.
Yeah.
So I did quit school, and I went to work at a mobile home factory, and I trimmed out windows and doors for a year. And I'd never been without sport or without, kind of the socialization of a school. And I found myself just going, this is a slog. So then I spent all my money learning how to fly. And I think it was probably after the second flight, I was completely hooked. And I was so much happier because I thought, no matter what I do, I'm going to fly.
So you went and did private flying lessons.
Yes.
Just learned to fly that way.
Yeah. And then because...
Were you thinking commercial?
No.
You were...
Yeah. It's interesting, you say that. I went to a small Christian college, and a lot of the classes that I took were, I took classes about, I had a whole different view of eschatology then, and also missions. And I thought, I want to go to the mission field and fly, because I thought, I'm not a preacher teacher.
Mission
guy who writes
Aviation Fellowship or something like that. Yeah.
Or Jungle Aviation and Radio Service, which JARS at the time, or New Tribes Mission, they all had piloting programs where you had to have 1 year of Bible, and you had to have a commercial instrument rating, a commercial license with an instrument rating, and you had to have an airframe and power plant license so you could work on airplanes. So that's what I started to pursue. So I enrolled in school, started flying, and I worked. And then I quit my job at the mobile home factory, and I got a part-time job at UPS because I could load boxes mindlessly and get paid a fair wage, and I could work 4 hours a day, and then the rest of the time I could fly and go to school. So That's what I did.
So how did the Navy fit in? Because a lot of people, am I wrong? It seems like a lot of people enlist or go into the military in order to learn how to fly.
Yeah. One of the precursors to flying in the Navy is that you need to be an officer.
Okay.
So you have to go to some sort of officer school. The number one for the Navy is the Naval Academy, and the Air Force is the Air Force Academy. A lot of Marines come out of the Naval Academy and become Marines, but you have to go to 4 years of college, graduate. You get commissioned as an officer, so you're not enlisting per se.
Gotcha.
But you're commissioned into a different level, and you get to do better things in terms of leadership. So or you can do it.
So you had to get you had to get your degree first.
Right, which I'd quit school.
Gotcha.
And what happened in the interim, there's this whole other story, but that's not really related to flying, was I knew this girl in college who was a year older than I was, graduated with her Bachelor of Science in Nursing, waited around for a very short period of time for this immature young man. And then she was like, I'm out of here. And she joined the Air Force as a nurse and moved to Texas. And when I finally started going, I know what I'm going to be when I grow up. I'm going to be a pilot, or I'm going to work on airplanes. I want to go to the mission field. I wonder if she'll go with me now. Because she wasn't interested before.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really know. And so what happened was she, because of her commitment, was committed for 3 years. And so we got married. I moved down there for her to finish her commitment. My intention at the time was to apply MAF, JARS, New Tribes, and go overseas. And then I was down there. San Antonio, Texas has 5 military bases in the city. And I got hooked. I watched the airplanes, and I was flying at the time, and I was towing gliders on the weekends. I was working, and I was flying parachute jumpers because I was trying to get all the experience I needed to go to the mission field.
Yeah.
In the interim, I saw these Air Force trainer guys flying around and Navy guys flying around in Corpus Christi, and I went, I think I could do that. I really didn't have a lot of confidence. But,
flying fighter jets?
Well, no, just in the military,
okay.
The trainers. And so I started to apply. I got turned down by the Air Force, and I thought, and I'll go talk to the Navy. And the Navy recruiter was this really uninterested guy who was like, you have no right to think you could be a Navy pilot. And I was like, okay, I'm not interested in the Navy either. So I didn't even apply. Even after he called me up and he said, hey, because he was like kicking me out the door. He goes, are you an engineer? I said, no. He goes, well, what's your GPA? And I said, 3.24. And it had been like 2.2 when I finished college, or when I quit school. But then when I went back, after I was married, I got straight A's for 2 years. So my GPA went all the way up to 3.25 or something like that. But so I walked across to the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, they want you to run around in the jungle and eat snakes and shoot bad guys. I mean, they're pretty basic. And if you can do a whole bunch of sit-ups and push-ups and you can run 3 miles in 18 minutes, they're like, we want you. So I waited. Every quarter they would come out with a quota for non-ROTC guys, non-academy guys. They're looking for officers, right? And so they'd take guys off the street and they'd put them through a 4-month officer training program in lieu of having been ROTC or the academy. And so I'd applied to that program, and I waited for 5 quarters, so almost a year and a half. And the Marine Corps had 0 aviation guarantee slots. So I turned 26, and you had to be in school before you were 27. So I walked the 15 steps across the hall from the Marine Corps recruiter to the Navy recruiter. And I said, I want to be a Navy pilot. And he said, well, you have to take some tests. You have to get a physical. I said, I did all that with the Marine Corps. And so because I'd already done all that, 10 days later, I had my head shaved and I was in officer training school.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's how I went from, I got kind of hooked on the whole military thing. I didn't think I was going to be a fighter pilot. I always thought I'll do transports or helicopters because I thought helicopters were pretty fun. But once you get into the competitive environment of training, there's 3 phases, and the competition just kind of consumes you, and you get drafted into It'd be like if you were in high school and you could run a 5-minute mile, and then you could run a 4.5-minute mile, and then you were running a 4:15. You think, that's my job. That's what I should do.
Yeah.
So I had some aviation experience, and I had other skill sets that I came with that were genetic, not because I practiced. And so flight school I was successful at it. And then so I kind of got, the farther up you go, you get eliminated. And the goal always is to be a Blue Angel, right? So flying fighters was kind of the natural progression. So that's where I ended up.
So that's where you ended up. Flying fighter jets and aircraft carriers, right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My very first job actually was teaching primary, intermediate, and advanced. And in the Navy, I was teaching. One day I was getting yelled at sitting in the front seat for not doing stuff right. And then it was like 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the back seat of a tandem jet teaching guys how to fly. And I did that for almost 2 years. And then after that, I went to fly F-18s. So, and I did fly on the carrier. Yeah.
Yeah. What is that like? That's got to be crazy.
It's funny. I would say all the way through training, you're doing all these different skill sets. You're just flying instrument flying. You're flying in formation. You're doing tactical stuff. You try to drop some little practice bombs, and you do some air-to-air stuff, which is air-to-air combat training. And in the Navy, you also are spending a fair bit of time practicing for going to the carrier. And you go by yourself. You don't go with an instructor, because there'd be too much input from an instructor that could either persuade the grader to think that he's doing better than he is, or you could be talked in or out of stuff. So they train you to go the first time by yourself.
Wow.
And it's kind of daunting the closer you get to the day when you know you're going to go, and you're practicing at the field, and you go, I should have gone in the Air Force. I mean, you have those thoughts, and you go,
yeah,
there was another chance here. And then you fly out to the ship. We went down to Key West, and we did a detachment down there, and you fly out in a group of 4 students with one instructor, and he brings you in over the top of the carrier, and then you peel off one at a time, and you turn in this big pattern, getting lined up to do your practice landings. And the whole time you're just mortified. You think, I don't know what I got myself into, except that it's almost like climbing a mountain in a chain, and you're all hooked up. I don't know if you've ever done any climbing.
No.
But being roped up and on crampons on ice, you just keep going because the guy in front of you, he just keeps going. And you're like, I guess that's what I do. So there's a certain amount of confidence in, well, he did it, so I think I can do it. And the first few times you don't remember anything. It's just all a blur.
Yeah.
But
so that's everybody. All Navy pilots have to go through it?
No, just that's one of the things about you go primary, intermediate, and advanced, and you get selected out. Like they take guys out right away and they put them in helicopters. Then the next group that goes out flies transport airplanes, which is what I thought I was going to fly. And if you get drafted into flying jets, then there's a variety of different airplanes you can fly. And some of them, they go, well, Mike, we trust you to fly by yourself. So, to coordinate all this data, get on your radar, to prosecute bad guys, to drop bombs and do all that stuff alone. Or you should fly with a crew concept and you need a guy in the back seat. So the farther up you go, the more alone you become. But it's built for high competitive type A people.
So this is out of ignorance, but so you're doing it solo. Is the F-18 a solo aircraft then?
Yeah.
So you're just by yourself.
Yeah. They have 2-seaters. They call them trainers. But I remember when I went to fly the F-18, I think I flew 3 flights with somebody in the back seat, and then you're on your own. You're just, there's nobody in the back teaching you anything, because they teach a lot of that in the simulator. And then you go out and you exercise it. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's got to be a fairly unique I mean, obviously it's a unique job and it's an elite job in the military, but that kind of autonomy, I mean, you're not autonomous. You have all kinds of people in your ears, I'm sure, but you're on your own. Like you said, you have to process all that information kind of on your own.
Yeah. In terms of having somebody else in the back seat, the other thing is you never fly by yourself in your airplane. Even if you're in your airplane alone, there's either one other guy or there's four in a group. There's a section which is two people, or there's four and you fly. That's how you fly tactically. So a lot of that's done without speaking, and there's a whole bunch that goes into it. But
then you were deployed. Were you on a carrier for a while then?
Yeah, you in the Navy, you're supposed to spend what's called a 6-month palm period where you are not deployed. You're not haze grain underway or at sea or whatever you want to call it. And then you spend 6 months doing what they call workups. And initially in workups, you go out to the ship with your squadron and it's just you and your group. And then more of the air wing comes in because there's like 70 to 80 airplanes on a carrier, including the helicopters. And it's all this big integrated thing. And you go out for a week, you come back for 2 weeks, you go out for 2 weeks, you come back for 2 weeks. And it's called workups. And by the end, the whole contingent is on board and you're the vanguard. You're the pointy end of the spear on a carrier group, and you guys can deploy anything, anywhere. And then when you do go, like we went to the Gulf. And that was the first time that carriers had been in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf. And that was during Gulf War I in 1991. And that was the whole Kuwait thing. And yeah.
And so you had a family at that point.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
So that was,
yeah.
How long were you in with you were married when you went in.
Right. And I had, I was an instructor for 2 years, and then I went to do training with the Hornet for 6 to 8 months. And then we were doing workups for 6 months. So I'd been in the Navy 3 or 4 years. I can't remember when I went to the Hornet. Okay. And we had 3 kids and we had our 4th. And then I went on cruise right after my 4th child was born. And he was just months old. And when I came back, he had no idea who I was.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then how long were you in the Navy before you?
So, 7 years on what they call active duty. And then I did 4 years part-time, which is called the reserves. And I did something completely different, but that was just to supplement income. And
were you with Alaska as well at that time?
Yeah.
Okay. So you went right from the Navy into Alaska Airlines.
Yeah. So commercial aviation. And the reason I went with Alaska was because I'd grown up in the Northwest and most of my family was there. I wanted to go back. And I had a really good friend who was in my squadron. His dad was the chief pilot at Delta at the time. And they have this funny thing in the Navy when you're coming back from cruise. So you go out on for 6 months and you come back. If you're on a West Coast sailor, you go through Hawaii, which you've been, so you know how far out it is. And if you're on a boat, it takes a fair amount of time. But you can come back to Hawaii and you park the carrier there, and almost half the guys get off, and they spend time in Hawaii. And then they fly back to their squadrons on the West Coast, either Whidbey Island or Lemoore or San Diego. And so the ship's almost half empty, and you can bring friends and family.
Oh, wow.
And so I invited my dad and my uncle. My squadron mate invited his dad, who happened to be the chief pilot at Delta, which none of us knew until he showed up. And then he became very popular because guys who were wanting to get out, wanted to get a job. They're like,
Yeah.
And he pulled me aside and he goes, look, you just send me your paperwork when you get out and I'll get you an interview. And I didn't want to go to Atlanta. I wanted to be West Coast. And at the time, Alaska was pretty simple. They flew as far east as Phoenix. That's
really?
it.
That was it.
And then they just flew north and south between as far up as, Nome, Alaska, all the way down to Cabo San Lucas in Mexico. And that was it. And of course, now they have not an international, but they have a domestic footprint that goes east and west all the time, both from LA, Seattle, and Portland.
Yeah. So you got on with Alaska because they were close.
They were the hometown airline. Yeah. And I think I was the number 900 essentially when I got hired. And there's like 3,500 pilots now, which isn't very big. And I think when I went out the door, I was number 20 something, just by attrition after 31 years. Wow. So,
yeah.
But I mean, there's two very different lifestyles, right?
Yeah. What was that transition like?
Well, the flying part is, at some point it becomes, it's an operator's job. So if you're a guy who does construction and you go from residential to commercial, there's a step up in a different way, but it's still doing the same thing. It's still spatial, it's structural, it's hitting timelines, buying materials, putting it together. And same thing in aviation. I'm flying something, but I'm not in the Navy. Every platform, as we call it, no matter what the numbers are, F-18, A-10, whatever, that is a platform to deliver weapons. And you as the guy who delivers them, you're doing everything you can tactically to put those bombs on target, say. And in the commercial aviation, you're still operating a big piece of equipment. A lot of the avionics the same. A lot of the instrumentation is very similar, but your mission is completely different.
Yeah.
You're going from A to B, and you got 150 people in the back. And so it's mundane in a certain respect, but it's fraught with more danger in another respect. One of the first times I flew across the ocean without sitting on an ejection seat, I felt naked. I thought, because I have to go down with this thing if something bad happens, And,
yeah, interesting.
And when you're in a fighter, you're kind of like, well, it's disposable.
It's just me.
I can jump out if something bad happens, and the helicopter will pick me up, and I'll get back on the boat. Yeah,
but you got all these people back there.
Yeah,
you're kind of responsible for.
Yeah, you have 150 people instead of 5,500 guys on a boat. But I mean, the job is completely different, and I loved my job in the Navy. There was a bunch of fun things. I had great jobs. I was an LSO, landing safety officer, landing signal officer, whatever you want to call it, the guy in the back of the boat. They call them paddles. It's like Roger Ball. I loved that job. I was the air-to-air weapons officer. I was the assistant training officer. I was the assistant operations officer. And I had lots of responsibility, and I got to deploy this weapons platform that did everything. Anything that you could put on an airplane, if it was going to go into the ground, any kind of smart guided bomb, smart missile, anything that could go air to air, great radar, Sidewinder missiles, all these really advanced technological stuff, I had data link stuff that I could get from ISAR radar boats that would show me everything that was in the air, everything that was on the ground. It was just extremely stimulating in every way. You
said you're the point of the spear.
Yeah, you really feel like you're the vanguard. And in the U.S. military,
you don't think of, I guess the layperson probably doesn't think so much of the pilot as a warrior or as a, right? It's like, you say like deploying weapons, all that kind of thing. But
no, it's Blue Angels to most people.
Right.
These guys flying around in formation, but all that formation stuff comes from protecting one another. That's where it comes from tactically. And you go in and you have an opportunity to support one another, but you're deploying something on a target, or you're trying to prosecute a target that's in the air or airborne. So at least it used to be that way 40 years ago.
Not so much anymore.
No, you look at the Ukraine war that's happening right now, and von Richthofen isn't the guy that you look at. There's driving drones around.
Yeah, interesting.
Drones you can't see, drones they can't find on radar, and they're flying them around remotely. And either that or GPS, and you just let them go, and then they deploy whatever it is you need to deploy. They can put anything on them. So the pilot, I'm not completely superfluous, but almost.
Yeah, interesting. But so going back to the commercial,
Yes.
so then you made that transition, got used to flying around 150 people in the back of a plane, and did that for how many years did you say?
31.
31 years.
Yeah.
What, so you were a pilot, let's see, I'm trying to do my math really quick here, but you had a fair bit of career before and after 9/11 then.
Correct.
Which would be, how big of an impact did that have on you as a pilot? So I know it felt like as a passenger, right? We felt a lot of change. Things really changed, but.
Well, they changed for us as well because security became so much more important. It used to be you could have a badge and a uniform, but post 9/11, what happened was some of those guys walked through airports with fake badges and uniforms that weren't even accurate. But, the personnel at the airport were like, "It's a pilot, just let them through," right? Now everybody goes through screening. It's either, biometrics, either your fingerprint or an iris scan or both now in order just to get to the airplane, because otherwise you can't trust it. So it did change for pilots too. And so did the security on the airplane. Once you got on, like you notice that the pilots don't come out unless there's a guard, and it was very, very different after.
Was that a weird time to be flying? Everything was grounded for a little while.
Yeah.
Were you actually in the air?
No, I was not. I wasn't flying on 9/11. I remember, I can actually remember, it's like when people from my generation talk about when Kennedy got shot.
Yeah.
It's one of those, wow.
Yep.
One of those things that happened. And it's like, I remember where I was, and 9/11, I remember I was driving out of Seattle up towards Bothell in my car, and I heard it on the radio. And I was like, they had hit the towers in New York.
Yeah, because it was early morning.
Well, it was for you in Michigan, but out here it was later. Yeah, correct.
It was earlier out here.
Yeah, it was later out here, right? Because we're 3 hours behind them on the East Coast. So when it happened, no, you're right.
Yeah, earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a pilot.
I mean, you flew.
I know. Yeah,
you fly across time zones all the time.
Right.
Yeah. Because I remember I was in class. I was in high school at the time, and I remember being in class, and then we went outside and saw. Speaking of planes, all the planes. We weren't real close to Detroit Airport, but
right?
Close enough.
But you're in the flight pattern up there.
All those planes were just stacked up in the air.
Right. They wouldn't let anybody land.
Bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a pretty scary time. When you're in an airplane, when you're flying a commercial airplane, you don't really worry about anything except for bad weather and running out of gas. And usually one leads to the other. But if they tell you can't land, and you're like, anywhere? Because usually you're like, I'll go anywhere to get gas. That's what you think. Until this blows over, until the weather gets better, I'll go someplace else. I'll get gas and I'll come back, which I've done before. People go, oh, I can't believe we have to go to Baltimore. I thought we were supposed to be going into D.C.
Well, we need fuel.
We need fuel, and the weather's really bad. But, 9/11, they stack people up. And they're like, you can't land, you can't take off, you can't do anything. And then they finally sorted out what had happened, which, was really rather fast. And then they started letting people land. But then the whole place was shut down for a long time.
Yeah.
And they were flying fighters around,
Yeah.
They just didn't know what they had. They didn't realize it was just a couple of people that snuck on at airplanes,
Yeah.
So
that changed things for you. And then eventually you ended up in Moscow, Idaho.
Yeah.
But still flying for Alaska.
Yeah.
So how does that, it was, as a pilot, were you kind of early in terms of can live anywhere? Or
no.
do pilots have to be right at the airport?
Sure. Well, I'll just use Detroit as an example. Do you know guys who can afford to live in Detroit? Yes. Do you know people who choose to live in Detroit if they can afford to live in Detroit or somewhere else? They don't live in Detroit.
Nope.
I remember flying out there one time, talking to a couple of Northwest pilots at the time, which are now Delta pilots.
Yep.
I was going out to see my brother, and I just had a conversation with him. I told him I flew for this funny airline out on the West Coast, Alaska Airlines, and they're like, oh. And I said, so where do you guys live? Because I told them I lived right in Seattle. And I go, oh, that must be nice. And one guy goes, well, I live in Phoenix. And the other guy goes, I live out just outside of L.A. And And I go, and you guys are based in Detroit? And they go, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And one guy looked at me and he goes, come on, man, nobody lives in Detroit. So yeah, the idea of commuting, it adds a half a day on the top or the front end of your trip, which can be a 2 or 3 day trip, 4-day trip. And then it's like 3 on, 4 off, 4 on, 3 off. It just kind of cycles. Essentially, you're working 15 days away from home. So getting to work.
And that's across airlines. That's just a typical thing, 15 days.
Yeah. And guys live all over the place. Phoenix is tons of pilots live there because
so then they can go anywhere.
Anywhere. So say you work for American Airlines and you want to live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and you drive an hour or 2 hours to the airport. It's not like you're doing that every day, right? So, I mean, you could live in, San Antonio, you could live in New Braunfels out of San Antonio and drive into, any airport that you can go to commute. Or if that's your domicile where you're actually based and your trip starts there, you can live 2 or 3 hours away. But if you're only doing it once a week, it's not a big deal.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I say, people say, oh man, that must be a terrible commute. And I go, well, it takes me about 5 or 6 hours to get to work from here in Moscow over to Seattle or Portland. And I go, how long does it take you to get to work every day? And they add it up and I go, so about 5 hours a week? Is that what you're telling me? I go, that's what I do.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting. So you could live anywhere. Basically, your airline would have to go, or a partner maybe would have to be where you are, because they're gonna let you. They're gonna cover all your costs.
Yeah. Well,
to fly.
Well, you don't get a guaranteed seat, but there's every flight deck has an observation seat or 2 observation seats, which is mandated by the FAA, so that an FAA inspector can come in. Like if we're pilots right here and right in between us, there's a jump seat, but he's slightly behind us. So he can observe us and go, these guys are doing a good job. They're standard. They're operating with whatever they said they're going to operate, standard operating procedures. They're complying with all their rules. And they're safe guys, right? They're not breaking any rules. So that seat's available for the FAA. It's rare that you see an FAA guy. So pilots have a courtesy where you can sit in that jump seat. And then you can commute back and forth to work. So I commuted on Horizon many, many, many times and sat in the flight deck of all the Horizon airplanes. So that's how I got to work. Now, when we moved over here for school and community and church, and 2 of my older kids were in college, and I could say, room and board, you can room and board with me, or you can pay to room and board somewhere else. But I have a house here now, and then we put 3 kids in a private school here, so in Logos, and it just, all of our costs went way down for my family, including the commute time for everybody in my family except for me. My life got far more complicated. My family's life got way simpler, really simplified.
Yeah.
So
you 15 days on.
Essentially, yeah.
And 15 off kind of idea?
And it's 2, 3, or 4 days at a time to equal that 15-day period.
So you're usually gone the whole time.
Yeah.
So you're flying 2 or 3, 4, but.
Yeah.
If you were commuting, if you lived in Seattle though,
I would drive to the airport.
Home every 3 or 4 days?
Yes.
Okay.
And same when I live here, I just have to, at the end of my trip in Seattle, I get off the airplane and then I have to get back here.
Okay. So you're rarely gone for 15 days.
Right.
Completely.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what would, if you were giving advice to somebody wanting to become a pilot, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the drawbacks and what are some of the real positives?
Well, the first thing I would say is, it depends on what kind of a pilot you want to be, because I know people here locally, like we have a mutual friend who works for Missions Aviation Fellowship now. So he became a missions pilot and he flew crop dusters here and he instructed at the local airport. And all that experience was really good for the kind of bush flying that he is doing now in a technical, really highly technical airplane in very challenging short fields, high mountains, bad weather. And he's doing it all in support of
Is that one of those Kodiaks?
Yes.
Oh, those are cool.
Very.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Made in Sandpoint, Idaho.
Yes, they are.
How cool is that?
And that was the inception of that airplane was to be on the mission field. And initially every 10th airplane was donated.
Wow.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That was their goal. The ex-CEO of Alaska Airlines, Bruce Kennedy, was a faithful Christian man who was on their board. And when they established that company, and they were putting together finance, and the idea was, our whole idea is to give every 10th airplane away. So that was kind of a founding principle.
Oh, that's amazing.
It didn't work out that way, and they eventually sold. Bruce Kennedy had his own personal accident in his own personal airplane flying back between Bellevue and Sandpoint, Idaho. Bellevue, Washington, Sandpoint, Idaho. He wasn't a really experienced pilot, but he was a really good CEO for our company. Now our company's completely woke, but that's a whole different story. So doing it now, I think the biggest thing that I didn't realize was the family separation that happens day in and day out, week in and week out. So
just that amount of time being gone from the family?
Correct.
Yeah.
Like you're sitting in a hotel room by yourself for like 12 hours. I mean, and you're sleeping 8 of it or something like that, but still you're kind of like wandering around in Chicago. It's not like you're experiencing Chicago.
Yeah.
Or even if it's someplace really nice like San Diego, you're still not with your family, even though you're walking up and down the boardwalk, just to get some exercise. It's a beautiful place, but it's not home. So it has some real downsides. The upside for me was, I think the whole thing that I discovered about myself was I'm an operator. And so I'm given to that. So,
and if you're, like you said earlier, if you're going to be an operator, it
can be more beneficial to operate an airplane than it is to do anything else.
Yeah. And then you went into instructing for a while. Does that change the amount of time you're gone at all or anything like that?
No. Still 15, 16 days a month. It's just that the nature of the job changed from me just flying A to B to teaching people how to fly A to B, teaching them how to fly the 737 in all scenarios. We would introduce them to the airplane, take them through all kinds of, 3 months of training, and then we would fly with them as well, and until they got cut loose and they were, a full up qualified round.
Yeah. So would there be a different, if you were to encourage somebody to get into it, would you direct them a different place than commercial? Is that kind of, I don't know if you even know this, but it seems like crop dusting is
dangerous.
Less and less.
Yeah.
And they're doing less and less of it.
Correct.
And so it seems like the opportunities are fairly limited if you want to be a pilot, if you want to fly.
Yeah. Most people that I know that want to fly tell me that they want to, I've talked to a lot of young kids and they say, I really want to fly. And the first thing I always ask them is, have you flown? And some of them say no, because it's an ethereal thing until you actually do it. I don't know if you know this, but most of my kids flew.
I didn't know that.
At one time. And all of them, to a person, said, yeah, I don't want to do this, because they didn't like it. But they didn't know until they did it. So if somebody comes and says, if you were 18 and you said, I really want to be a pilot, I'm like, have you flown at all? Go take some lessons. Well, how many? I think you should take 5 or 6 lessons, and then you come back and tell me if you really like flying or not. If you really like it, then we'll talk about all the different things you can do.
What does 5 or 6 flying lessons cost?
I wish I knew.
You don't know?
I don't know.
Anymore?
Yeah. I bet it's between $175 and $200 an hour. So, each lesson's probably an hour and a half.
Yeah.
But it's a small investment to make.
Invest that amount in it and to see what you like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I totally would do that. I tell them the same thing. I look at their parents and I go, why don't you give him lessons or make him pay for it or do something?
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of those things that a lot of that's maybe more in general. It's like try things, right? As for kids, try things out, do things that you might be interested in, and try them out early. I kind of think some of those things like, I tell kids sometimes I'm talking to them about college and what to do during college and all that. It's like, there's going to be plenty of time to make money.
Right.
Use the opportunity to maybe go learn something, go volunteer to do something, go intern someplace, go, if you always thought, I want to be a cattle rancher or whatever, like go do it for a summer, go try it out. Right. Yeah.
The interesting thing about that book, I was telling you, What Color's Your Parachute, or What Color's My Parachute by Bolles, or Bolles. I don't know if it's Bowles. He's a guy who went to seminary, an Anglican guy. And he was always so practical in his thought process. It's like, what things do you like? What things don't you like? And why do you remember all the things that you remember from every year of your life? And what he's saying is usually the things you really like to do are the things you desire to do, and you actually have a skill set to do them. It's like, I don't know if you ever took any art, and if you ever did any watercolor painting.
Not well.
That's for sure. So, and then we know people personally who do it well. Mm-hmm. Why? I don't know, but they do. But I learned early on that I wasn't going to get there from here, right? I can't run a 10 flat 100 in high school, so I probably don't have a future in sprinting. And but the operator part was, when I reflected on my life, if it had wheels and a motor, I'm not kidding. If it was a mini bike, go-kart, if I was driving the car, bulldozer, boom truck, there's all kinds of things, tractors. I drove all before I had a license. And it was because I was just given to it and I was driven to it. And then I never thought about translating that into operating an airplane. But that part was after I finished that little self-study course, it kind of became self-evident. Hey, these are things you like. These are things you can do. And you ought to pursue it somehow. And so I started formalizing that by taking lessons. And that's why I really encourage kids, go fly. Because like some of my kids, I have 5 kids, and they would fly, and they were like, man, I get motion sick. Or I get the sweats and I am afraid, and I don't like that. So you're kind of like, you learn that. I actually had a student that was a Marine student, and I would fly with him, and he was flying advanced jet in the Navy. He's almost ready to go out into what we call the fleet and fly, an F-18 or something. And every time I'd go out and fly with him, we'd do something dynamic, which was air-to-air, simulated combat, air-to-air maneuvering. He would get sick. And he'd go, sir, can you take the airplane? I go, sure, I got the airplane. He'd throw up in a bag. He'd pack it all away, put it in a bag, stuff it in. He goes, I'm ready to go. Now I got it. And I remember sitting down with him after doing this 2 or 3 times. And I was like, where'd you go to school? He goes, I went to Georgia Tech. I said, oh, you an engineer? He goes, yeah. I said, you don't have to do this. He goes, yes, I do. I said, why is that? He goes, my grandfather was a Marine aviator. My dad's a Marine aviator. I will be a Marine aviator. He goes, for as little time as I possibly can. But you can force somebody to do it. Yeah. But he wasn't given to it. He was competent, but he wasn't excited. It didn't give him joy. And I think the way God makes us, there's a part of you do things that you're built this way. God gives gifts, right? He gives abilities. And you're most fulfilled when you're doing that. And if you're getting remunerated for it, you're making money for it. It's not work. Yeah. It's a pleasure. It's like Chariots of Fire when he says, when I run, I feel his pleasure. You're like, that's it. That's the key. Made to do. That's what you got. How do you get there? Yeah. So go fly at the local airport, 5 or 6 times. And if you're afraid at night, I tell them, fly at night. If you get motion sick, if you don't like it, if you don't love it. And see, when I did it, I was like, I know what I'm going to do. It took 2 flights and I was hooked. I said, I can get there from here, wherever it is. And I didn't know that I was going to be doing what I did, but yeah, I would always encourage somebody to do that. So, and I agree with you. You have a kid who says, I want to be a merchant acquisition finance guy. You're like, really?
Go try it out.
Well, yeah, go shadow somebody. I want to be a doctor. Go watch what a doctor does. It's not just the white coat,
Yeah.
And so in order to have those long days of separation, it's got to be something you love to do, or it just becomes counterproductive to your whole life and your family's life. Mm-hmm. So I loved my job in the Navy. It was probably the most fun I've ever had. Mm. And I could do it hours and hours and hours a day. It was so stimulating and just captivating, that it was like there was endless opportunity, but it took a lot of time. Yeah. It took too much time. So I translated that skill set into something that was more domestic, which was not nearly as fun. But you asked me about instructing. So I did instruct for 10 years, and that became another stimulus because I was putting back in what I'd gotten out. And that was very satisfying, was transferring that skill set and knowledge to the next, group of flyers.
Yeah.
So I really liked that.
Yeah.
It actually kind of kept me alive for the last 10 years.
Well, what's next?
I don't know.
You don't know. No. Figure it out.
Yeah.
Something here, something on the Palouse.
Yeah. The something that happened to me, it's funny. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. It's kind of like I remember being, hooked on football in high school until I ruined my ankle. And then I was hooked on soccer in college. It was not nearly as hard on my body. And I was hooked on that till I wasn't. But I never looked back going, man, I should have stuck with football. And then when soccer was gone, I was like, I never thought, I should keep doing this. I just did the next thing, Then I did military aviation, and I go, do you miss it? I'm like, actually, I don't. I really don't. I really loved it.
You loved it, but you're not. Don't miss it.
And then I flew, and then I instructed, and I really loved that. And it's like, I might do it, but it's not because I need to anymore. I don't know what I need to do next. I really wish I could figure that out because I want to do so, 5 or 10 years. Yeah. So, and I think there's a lot to do here. So
absolutely. Well, you've got some land. That's going to keep you busy for a little while anyway.
Yeah.
I know. I feel like, man, I could spend 40 hours a week. I probably someone should be spending 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
Things around the property.
Maybe if we became more like Joe Salatin and we were productive without overworking ourselves and making it reproducing and putting back into the ground that stuff that comes out.
Well, we're both pig farmers.
I know, right?
Apparently. So, yeah.
How many hogs do you have?
We've got 4.
We got 6. They're getting big now.
Ours are still, well, we've only had ours for a couple of weeks. Well, maybe not even a week and a half.
Well, we've talked. Oh, really? We've had ours for 2 months.
Ours are 4-H bound.
Okay.
So they're going to the fair, but they're still pretty cute. And I don't know. I love sheep. We've got sheep too.
Yeah, I know.
And I love them, but man, those pigs they're easy. They're easier. And I don't know, they're pretty fun.
They are smart.
Yeah. The dog loves the pigs.
Yeah. They're funny too. They all run together. They stop, they run back, and I don't know, you feel like you bump into them when you're trying to feed them or give them something to, give them water, and they squeal like you're murdering them. They're so offended. They're really smart animals. That's why I love the hot wire. One hot wire can keep them anywhere. But yeah, I think there's a future in that. So
good. Well, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
And we'll keep us posted on what's next.
Thanks for joining us. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you next week.